Oh, I hope you're comfortable because today's conversation is squirmy with a capital S. And speaking of capital S, we're talking today about sex and sexuality and where it should be learned about and why it matters, and shame. So much shame is tied into these conversations. And fair warning, I might have shared just a tiny bit too much information with today's guest, Haug.
So many adults are pretending to fit a narrative, even if it's not their own narrative, because the need to belong and our former attachment wounds are so strong that to live into who we are feels extremely risky. And so many of us, though, then I see live with resentment. And this is where anger and rage start to play out. And then when we decide, and for me, this is why I think those who are trans are so threatening to so many people, because they decided to live their truth. They risked belonging to be themselves. And what a threat to so many people who said, how come you could do it and I can't?
Welcome to Brave Middle Ground, where curiosity meets courage. I'm Dayna Del Val, and here we're exploring the spaces between isolation and connection, division and unity. We'll reclaim the middle ground, one brave step at a time, starting right now. Kara, welcome to Brave Middle Ground. I'm glad to have you here. Let's jump right in because I think this is going to be a squirmy and compelling conversation. I'm prepared. So tell me from your perspective, Kara, what does Brave Middle Ground mean to you? Middle ground.
Wow. What does brave middle ground mean to me? I would say, I think brave middle ground is living in the nuance and the ambiguity of life and being able to understand that we don't know it all and we will never know it all, and to live more with curiosity and intrigue instead of judgment, which so many of us do.
Intrigue instead of judgment. That's pretty powerful.
Yes.
I mean, it feels maybe more like a time to easily fall into judgment than any other time I can remember. So how do you do that in your own life? How do you keep the pendulum swung closer to the intrigue versus judgment sides?
Well, I would say, because I'm human, I think my first instinct is to go directly into judgment and reaction. And then I have to go, wait a minute. Okay, let's pause. I do try to keep people around me who have different opinions on life. And I just try to ask questions to understand. And I also, and that's why too, I also, you know how on our Facebook and social media, I also keep all of those voices who I disagree with on there too. Because I think it's important just to understand that there's people out there who don't think the same way as you. And it still might make you angry. That's a natural feeling to have, and it frustrated and things like that. I'm also in this space of, in order for us to live in community, we have to learn how to live together. And not everyone is the same. And so where do we find our commonalities? And how can we then learn how to stop yelling at each other and learn how to listen? And I think, I actually think that is the biggest listening right now is, I think, what everyone is lacking the most of. And I don't think we're able to get there enough, because so many of us, we're just reading things all the time, and we're rarely engaging in conversation without then having what we're going to say next be right there, So really listening is, I think, what everyone needs to work on right now.
Yeah, and I would just say, because I say this all the time, I think the only place that real listening is actually taught is in theater. Because at the end of the day, acting is almost entirely about listening and responding as honestly as you can. And the trick, of course, to acting is you know what you're going to say next because it's scripted, but you still You
Right.
still have to listen. And so that's not exactly unlike life. If I'm talking to someone who I know thinks that this current nightmare in the White House is a positive, you
Mm.
better believe I've already worked up 50 answers. And
Right.
that tests my ability to listen in extraordinary ways, because what could somebody say that would change my mind? I would love to see
Right.
the thing that would make me go, well, that's a good point. I can't come up with
Right.
one redeeming point, not one. So, it's a challenge. Now, here's the thing that I think is really important. There
Hmm.
are other issues besides him. And I don't know that we can unpolarize that. But I do
Right.
think we
Well,
can
yes.
unpolarize all kinds of other issues, which either have kind of gotten wrapped up into these big political conversations, or we've sort of lumped together the same way Congress kind of slips stuff into bills before they get passed. We've kind of slipped
Hmm.
stuff in. So we're dealing with massive quantities of things. And if we actually broke things down, I think that's where your point of, coming from curiosity or coming from a place of listening versus judgment actually can be effective.
Yes. Yeah, because I feel like behind all of this stuff is because I always look at it as like emotional needs.
Mm,
I
mhm.
don't know. I mean, maybe that's because my background's in psychology and because of what I do. But I'm like, where is it that so many of us, there's this sense of like agency and power that people are grabbing onto right now, where it's like all of this that's happening in our world of this, I think all comes around to power, like this element of greed, this element of controlling. There's a lot of controlling happening. And so my first thought always goes to when someone is seeking a sense of power and control, where did they lose their agency?
Mm, mhm.
And then how did that affect them? And so often, like, we're not aware always of that. And then we internalize them because so much of us aren't given permission to feel those things or to process them. And so I'm always like trying to figure out where people have lost their agency and then how they then project that onto others. Because I think when we're not fully emotionally equipped with our coping skills, then we're like, well, I'm going to give you my trauma.
Mhm, mhm.
And because I don't want to live alone in that,
Mm.
I think that's what a lot of people end up doing.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, where as a society then can we change our story around this to help everyone? You know, these are the things that I think about.
Yeah, well, I would never sleep if I focused on that, because that feels like a huge issue.
Well,
Um,
I don't sleep a lot.
yeah, yeah. Get in line, Kara. I'm
That's true.
sorry to say.
That's true.
So, okay, I haven't shared with anybody yet what you do, because what you do is so damn fascinating to me. And just for the audience's perspective, I'm going to learn a bunch of this stuff with you, because you and I have only had one pretty quick conversation, and I'm so intrigued and a little sweaty about however this conversation's going to go, that I'm ready to just jump in. So I want to tell people that your work is called Reframing Our Stories, which I think everything you've said up to this point feels like, well, that's exactly what she must do. She must help people gain agency, and she must help people, figure out how to be emotionally equipped. And I think that is what you do, but that's not the entirety of what you do. So tell people what you do, Kara.
So, my business is called, as you said, Reframing Our Stories. And I help primarily the three systems that I feel has affected our sexuality the most. I'm a sexual health educator. And those three systems to me are family, school, and churches. And so I work with those three communities and helping them learn how to have sexual health conversations and around relationships and emotions autonomy and, functions of our body in a way that's shame-free as best as we can, right? Because sometimes shame is passed down. And so we always check ourselves. But this is what I spend my time doing because I have learned the way that sexuality has affected us is so intimate and intense, and it intersects with so many parts of our lives that once I started studying it, I realized that it was a place where, especially in the American society, we have just caused a lot of detriment to ourselves, and people are walking around with a lot of hurt that doesn't need to be there. And so I became a sex educator to help take away.
I'm thinking about my I guess I would have been a 7th grader when I started confirmation. So the first little booklet that we got for confirmation, first of all, our minister was probably 45, but in my mind he was 95.
Right.
And he was very gruff and super no nonsense. And this is the kind of mid to late 80s. And the first line of the confirmation book, our introduction to confirmation, was, in quotation marks, "Hello, I love you. Won't you tell me your name?" End quotation marks. And then an explanation that this song by The Doors, which, I mean, none of us knew who The Doors were. It was a whole generation removed at that point. That song was really sort of anti-Christian. Because how could you possibly love someone you didn't know? And so I can't tell you much more about the lesson than that, except that it was very clear to me that church and sex were incongruous. Or talking about it in church, or I mean, all these kinds of things. And so that's what I remember from 2 years of confirmation, is that the Doors song was not a pro-Christian song.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's so stupid. Such a stupid waste of time, but whatever. But I'm so just kind of gobsmacked that in admittedly 40 years, we've gone from that, and you're a party of one, so I don't think that sex ed is being taught in churches across the country, but it's being taught in some churches because you're doing it. How in the world did you find your way into that niche?
Well, first I will say there's other people like me.
Okay, that's good to know.
There are people. Yeah, there's actually an entire curriculum written by the United Church of Christ Church, and the Unitarian Church called Our Whole Lives, which is geared towards religious communities. And there's other curriculum out there. I found my way into this niche because I grew up in the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And so my background was church for me became a second family. So I grew up in a family that, my parents did divorce. There was some issues with there. I'm trying to make this real quick.
You don't have to.
Snapshot version. Okay. So church to me was a place where I could feel actually safe. It became a second family. Also, I grew up in the 90s where not necessarily my church was giving this message, but I grew up in the culture of purity culture that surrounded the Christian circles, right? And so I had just a strong desire to be loved and accepted. I was someone who didn't have the best self-esteem or confidence growing up. And so I was like, if I am a good girl, and if I do the things that I'm supposed to do, then I know I will be loved by God and other people, right? So I very much followed that straight and narrow. I was the goody two-shoes for a long time. So that's kind of that background. And so I found myself going to seminary when I was 24. And because I wanted to give back the way I was given, I was like, I'm going to be a youth minister. My youth minister very much saved my life in many ways. So I wanted to do that for other people. And it was actually in seminary where I started getting interested. Well, college too, because I was in psychology and took gender classes, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So in seminary, I took a class called Sex and Sensibility. And it was there where the professor Gary Pence, who is also a minister, said, very wise, in order for you to minister to other people, you have to understand your sexuality. And I was like, huh, that's different, right? And it piqued my interest.
Because what kind of seminary were you in? Were you in a evangelical Lutheran seminary?
I was,
Wow.
yes.
Okay.
And people often confuse the word evangelical with the evangelical Lutheran Church. It's not what the evangelical denomination is equivalent to in the Lutheran Church,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was fascinating, and we learned a lot, and we had to write a paper on kind of our sexual history, meaning how were we taught about sex? What did we learn about body image? What was the relationship like with our caregivers? Things like this. And I recognized as I wrote this paper so many cycles that happened within my family. I recognized things that I said in every single relationship that I had, how I started that, and which was self-deprecating and apologizing for a part of my body because I was given messages around that part of my body my entire life. And I was like, wow, that sucks and that's sad. And I was like, if everyone knew this and took time to learn about this, it would change. And then you fast forward, and I became a youth minister, and I worked outside of DC in a very wealthy area. And kids, the youth, once you gain their trust, start asking you questions. And they were all so many about sex. And they would tell me about the things that they were experiencing. And I was like, wow, these kids are just kind of doing the motions and not understanding what they're doing or why they're doing it. They're just doing it because they think they have to. And I felt like their world was very advanced, and yet they didn't know much about their body. And then their parents would talk to me, and they had all the same questions. And I was like, okay. And I couldn't answer them as I wanted to. And then I worked in foster care in more of a rural Michigan experience. And so many of those cases were sexual abuse, right? So across demographics, from the very poor to the very rich, through different cultures, what I learned is most, 95%, had very little understanding of how their body works or the function of their body. They all had the same questions around sexual health, and all wanted to belong and all wanted to feel a certain way. And I just thought to myself, wow, we are as a nation doing a terrible job caring for each other. And we take this subject and render it silent, we don't talk about it, but everyone needs to talk about it. In some way, it comes up in every conversation. And then what made me go into this was when I recognized that these young children who were being molested and or raped and experienced intercourse in some way were going to churches or stayed in conservative Christian homes and kept hearing, if you have sex before you're married, it's a sin. And I just was like, these kids can't recognize the difference cognitively of what happened to them was not okay, but they know that it was sex. And so their message that they're getting from a church that represents God is that you're bad. And so when you take on that you're bad, you then think that you don't have worth. And then you continue to make choices, or then you then start to make choices that are not great for you. And I just saw that playing out. And I was like, I am 100% not okay with any of this. I'm not okay with people getting messages from the church like this any longer, because it has not served us. It makes us feel lousy. And I'm pretty certain the God that I know doesn't want us to feel lousy. Had different intentions around humans experience intimacy. And was kind of like, this is not how I wanted it to go. And so that's why I found a program at the University of Michigan that is a sexual health education, counseling, and therapy program that I went to. And ever since then, this is what I've been doing. And I just have a lot of passion around it.
That's amazing. I'll just start with a question and we'll just keep going. How,
Yeah.
what kind of pushback have you gotten? Do you get? Is it evolving? Is it getting better?
Is it getting better? I think, well, really what gives me hope is I have a lot of parents who reach out to me, right? Like what's getting better is that I am being asked to come into churches and talk about this, right? Like people are recognizing that the messages that we have been told does not fit what our life experiences are.
Mm.
I think people are recognizing just, you know, people say things like this to me. I've had many women actually say this to me, where they say, I followed all the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. I was the good girl. I didn't have sex until marriage. And now I'm in a marriage and I feel duped, right?
Do they feel duped because they're not being sexually satisfied or because they're curious about who else is out there? Or what is the root of that?
Well, the root of that is we've been given a fantasy from Disney through wherever
Romance
that
novels.
romance, you know, that we will, in the cis heteronormative narrative, that the woman will be saved by the man, that we will do the things we were told we had to do, and then we would get married, and the romance would live, and the sex would be great. And then we get into these positions and we don't recognize that the stories we were given lives in our bodies. And so oftentimes if you've been told that sex is not okay and it's bad and it's filthy and you should save it for the one you love, which is super confusing. Why are we saving something filthy and bad for the one we love? But these are the messages. Then we enter into these bedroom spaces and our bodies don't respond in the way that we were told they would respond. We also recognize that we don't even know our own bodies, maybe, right? Because we're also told that touching yourself is not okay, especially for females. And so then you don't understand your own sense of pleasure. And then we also don't realize that I'm going to say this statistic wrong. It's probably around 30% of people who cannot experience orgasm vaginally.
I think it's higher.
It's higher. I think it's reversed. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's reversed, right? So the most of our orgasmic experience comes from the clitoris, but we're expected to experience it in vaginal intercourse, and most people can't. Right. And so then you have this sense of shame. Right. Or there's, the others those males or who have penises who maybe can't get an erection or who can't perform the way that they have had expectations around that. Right. And then we're also not taught about ways to incorporate the conversations around what happens when we have children, what happens if our drive goes away because we're exhausted, what happens when our bodies change and they don't respond anymore to what used to work, what happens when we get in disagreements because we thought we had everything figured out around traditions and all the stuff. So it's like all these things come in that we're not talking about that really affect our relationships, and then if you transfer that over even to then queer relationships and things like that, there's also sometimes internalized homophobia that they experience that hinder their own sexual functioning. There's also gender roles that when they're in partnerships, who can mimic different gender roles and how that can affect them. And so there's just a multitude of things that we are never talking about that deeply affect us. And because we don't talk about it, we internalize it, and then we feel a sense of shame.
So many of my audience know this, but I have to give the context for it to make sense. My husband has been sober from alcohol for, by the time this airs, about 8.5 years. And we were very, very secretive about it for the first 3 years of his sobriety. Very few people actually knew that he'd been away in rehab and all these things. And then we went very, very public with it. And then we took it even further and did this program called Daily Dose of Dr. Mary and Dee Dee, which was 384 episodes, a live stream all around addiction recovery and rebuilding a marriage. And before we went live, we had lots of conversations. And the only thing that we decided we would never discuss publicly was our sex life, because it just felt inappropriate. And we felt like there was plenty of other content. We didn't need to go down that path. And also, I'm a good Midwestern, shame-filled, like, please don't say any embarrassing words around me, girl. So there was no way I was going to be able to do it. He's from Europe. He would talk about anything, but I'm the worst. So, whatever. But as I'm listening to you talk about all of this, I am so working through my own stuff, listening to you and thinking internally, yep, check, 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 check. But I'm also so struck by how similar what you're talking about is landing with me, the same way the shame and isolation of addiction lands with me. Because I was consumed with both shame and isolation. The more shame I felt about the addiction, the more isolated I became, the more it increased the shame, which just increased the isolation. I mean, it was eating us alive, even from each other. And what I am so really profoundly struck by is I'm experiencing the same shame listening to you talk about sexuality, pleasure, body parts, the filth of sex, and yet this beautiful thing. I mean, all that crap. I'm so mad listening to this conversation, Kara, because I feel like, what the actual hell are we doing? I'm 52 years old. What are we doing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's the response. So whenever I do workshops, right? So I walk in and I do these workshops and set the tone for the room. From the very first moments when I started doing workshops, I would do these things and have conversations, and, I'm an educator, so I have people do different stuff. And then at the end, I always felt, well, I blew it, because I was looking around and I'm like, wow.
And everybody looked like this.
Right. Well, people were just silent. Like, sometimes it was just like stone cold faces, and people are just sitting there. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm really bad at this. Like, maybe I need to reconsider what I'm doing. But then what happened is I would have people would line up to talk to me. And what I started recognizing is what was happening is that people were processing the entire time. So their silence was just an awakening a little bit for them. And I started to recognize, like, what I was experiencing as the presenter was tangible grief. And so for me, being a sex educator is grief work for people. Because, one, we start to recognize our lives would have been very different if we started having these conversations. And so your experience of feeling angry is just normal. So many people feel angry. When I teach human sexuality for therapy students, and many people are in their 40s and 50s in that class. And I've had, especially the 50-year-olds, go, why am I just learning about this now? This is ridiculous. Like, I'm so mad. I'm so mad, And so that's why I try, like, for me, I mean, I grew up in a family who at least on the maternal side, most of the females had been sexually molested. And I experienced how that affects family, how that affected my maternal ancestors and what that did to them without having the coping skills as we do now. We have more therapy and tools that we can utilize now, right? But I just see, like, I get so frustrated that we have decided to live by a code of, you have this body part and you have this body part, so you need to be like this and you need to be like that. And when you take a moment to think about that, how absurd is that? To be like, have a vagina. So because you have this vagina, You need to act quiet and docile and small. And because you have a penis, you need to be strong, to not feel sadness, and to not show fear.
Mm.
And that alone is just tearing us apart. And yet we're like, let's continue to do
Let's
that.
double down on that. Yep. Don't be
Yeah.
a sissy. Don't be
Yeah.
too big. Yeah. Yep.
And whenever I have moments and workshops where I have all sexes and genders in the room, and we talk even just about gender and what it does. Like, I will specifically remember when some college boys came to me after we talked about just the way all of us are supposed to act and do things and blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, thank you for acknowledging us, because sometimes it sucks and we actually hate it.
Mm.
And what I have recognized is so many of us, right, the need to belong is huge. And I actually was just composing a social media post before this, and I started writing about pretending. And how, like, as children, when we played pretend, it was out of imagination and curiosity of who are we and what does this mean to us? And does this feel good? Does that feel good? And it was just like a place to explore. But I also didn't realize that as adults, we pretend to belong. So many adults are pretending to fit a narrative, even if it's not their own narrative. Because the need to belong and our former attachment wounds are so strong that to live into who we are feels extremely risky. And so many of us, though, then I see live with resentment. And this is where anger and rage start to play out. And then when we decide, for me, this is why I think those who are trans are so threatening to so many people, because they decided to live their truth.
Mm-hmm.
They risked belonging to be themselves. And what a threat to so many people who said, how come you could do it and I can't? Mm. And that is what I see happening. And so many of us, I mean, me too, right? Like, I'm also like, how do I live my truth? Like, it's a process. And I think the best thing we can offer ourselves is to start unpacking this and being like, why are we doing this? Mm. Why do we continue to pass shame around the dinner table?
Not just pass it, but dish it up.
That's what I mean. It's like,
yeah.
I said in a chapter of a book that I wrote that we pass sexual generational shame the way we pass mashed potatoes.
It's funny. I was thinking about mashed potatoes too, because it feels like you can really serve up a huge spoonful, and it's just like it lands hard on that plate. It's not like peas that might fly around. That thing lands and sticks.
It's sticky. Yeah, It stays there, and it takes a long time to start chipping away at it.
I'm trying so hard to think about how to engage in this conversation and still honor the fact that I don't discuss my sex life publicly, because I want to do that. I want to continue to do that. But I will say that I read something the other day that I sort of snorted at, and it was a whole thing about menopause, because I mean, first of all, it's sort of like menopause has just been discovered. Now it's everywhere, and suddenly it's the hip thing to talk about, despite the fact that virtually nobody knows anything about it, including my internal medicine doctor, but whatever.
Right.
So I read this thing, and it was a whole series of women who'd written in to say, what do you love about menopause? What are your questions about menopause? And one of the women wrote and said, what I love about being postmenopausal is I finally have embraced my body, and I love who I am. And I thought, what the actual F is the matter with you? What do you mean you've embraced your body? I'm finally past the phase of life where I think, oh God, please don't let me be pregnant. So I guess I have that to be grateful for. But embraced my body, it's all kind of falling apart now. What am I embracing? I mean, I think some of my initial response to listening to you talk is, God damn, I had this incredible body. I've had this incredible body. And for all the years where it was actually kind of in excellent working condition, I was constantly being like, no, 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 no. I denied it all of this incredible pleasure because of all this
Yeah.
crap that I had been taught. And now that the pleasure couldn't lead to pregnancy, now I'm like a friggin' prune. And that's a whole different problem. Sorry for the
Right.
lot of information to my listening
No,
audience.
no, but that's the truth. I look at pictures of myself when I was younger and I just look at her and I go, why was I so mean to you?
I know we would never do that. I look at my nieces who are tweens and I look at them and I think I would never say to you what I said to myself at that age.
I know.
Never.
Right?
I don't
Ugh.
even think it about them.
Yeah.
It's not like I
It
have
just,
to remind myself not to say to them, oh, you should start hating yourself now.
yeah. You know, it's a good time. Yeah.
Right. Hey, you know how you feel confident about being a soccer player? You should give that up right now. And you should just obsess over how fat you are at 81 pounds or whatever you are. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just,
Seriously.
it's so heartbreaking. This might be the most heartbreaking conversation I've ever had.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I know.
Well, I invited you in, so it's not
I
your
know.
fault.
No, I mean, and so this is, so when I talk about this stuff, right? Like, my hope is to help people to go on a journey with people. Because, listen, one, I am not perfect at this, right? Like, I am still learning how to unpack all of the narratives I've been given, and it's so hard. And I have completely messed up along the way, like, made poor choices, act out of my own abandonment wounds that, I've done it all too. And now I can see, okay, I can recognize, okay, this is why that happened. And then, like, how do I work to not repeat it? And then this is how you are feeling about yourself now because this is what you have been told, and then how do I work to offer myself compassion? So it's one of these things where I'm still learning, but I hope to bring people along in the journey and to know, like, for once we start to talk about sexuality and things, the thing is, it does get messy. Like, we have to recognize, like, it's going to get a little messy and it's going to probably hurt. But once we start the process, like I have said, so I am a Christian, I believe in God. And to me, I have become a better Christian because of studying sexuality. For sure.
Why?
Because for me, it's because I understand more about human relationships. And I understand the ways that relationships are where I tell people all the time in my workshops, I say, we are always working things out in relationships. And we often feel also bad about making mistakes and things like that. But it's in relationships we're going to make the most mistakes. And it's because we're always trying to find ways to get needs met that were not met. And sometimes we're going to do that in ways that are not great. And maybe we are like, maybe we harm, and maybe we, say mean things and stuff like that. I'm like, but for us to move forward, we need to look at those relationships where maybe we caused harm or we are like, being selfish or different things that might happen in human relationships and then say, why? Get to the root to that and then continue to work, right? So, like, how do we not continue to do those behaviors? What do we need to do to love and care for ourselves? And that's the thing, like, I tell parents, I'm like, one of the things I want you to work on the most with your kids is to give them those tools of how do they care for themselves? Like, what are the coping skills, right? The biggest thing we all need to work on is rejection. Like this whole thing, when I teach about consent, I talk about it's actually pretty brave to say no. And it's not just saying yes or no, it's how we get there. Because to say no to someone means you're going to disappoint a person, and we've been taught not to disappoint people. We've also grew up with the words of our economic world of don't take no for an answer. Mm-hmm. So we're real bad at consent, right? And And because the fact of belonging is such a need. And so if I say no and claim myself and my own safety, even to just saying no to going to a party to hang out with my friends, even as simple as that, because I'm tired, I'm risking them maybe being upset with me, of them maybe not inviting me to the next one. Right. And so learning how to even get to those no's and yeses, like, takes bravery and courage. And we aren't teaching that.
I wonder, Kara, if it's is like my default was just no. Always. I was taught to say no like a toddler. You know what I mean? You know, you can say to a little kid, do you want to
Yeah.
have peas? No. Do you want this? And they'll say no to something they want because they're just in no mode.
Right.
And I feel like I was not raised in a purity household. Certainly sexuality and sex was, I'm going to go with poorly explained in my house. And I don't know what my mother would say to that. I'm sure I'll hear from it because she listens. So we'll see. But I don't think I would have ever said, well, eventually I did say yes, but I don't think I would have said yes any sooner than I did because I was just conditioned to say no. It never, I mean, I knew people around me having sex, but I was just I'm a good girl. I'm not having sex. I'm not doing this. I'm really struck by thinking back to younger me, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old me, who was so conditioned to say no that it wasn't about feeling brave or feeling empowered. It was just, that was the only answer I had.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't regret that I don't have this extensive sexual past exactly, but I am aware of the fact that I never even allowed myself to explore it or to consider it, much less explore it. And that feels like the first area of, well, why wouldn't you think it through for yourself? I mean, what the hell was I reading all those stupid romance novels for?
Yeah. Well, and I've had other people too who have talked to me about that. Like, so it does vary, right? Like, I was told, like, it was hard for me to say no or yes to anything, really. Like, I was just like, you tell me how to behave and I will do it, right? Like, that's my experience. But I've had other people who talked about how they also grew up like you, like where they felt like they said no to everything. And in that, said no to other things just within life that would have offered them pleasure. Right. So even saying no to like that cupcake that they really wanted, or like no to these other things. And so there's this element too of not allowing ourselves to experience the sense of pleasure that we could have in other forms.
I'm so curious what my audience is thinking right now. As I mean, I have a general sense of who my average listener is. And I'm gonna bet that they are listening to this with as much sadness and maybe as
Yeah.
much anger as I am. It feels like such a waste. I've wasted such a beautiful gift. And you can think of it as a gift from God. That makes me kind of want to barf personally,
Sure.
but whatever. I'm not anti-God,
No,
but
that's fine.
that whole notion of like, oh, sex is a gift from God. No, I don't agree with
Yeah.
that.
And then
Whatever.
yes.
But this whole gift that I had that I could have shared in this beautiful way that I just more often than not simply shut down for myriad reasons. And I certainly know I am not the only one who's feeling that way. What a
Well, this is,
tragedy.
yeah. I mean, and so we have to honor that. We have to honor the fact that that grief, like I said, right? We need to feel our anger around that. We need to honor that grief. And then, what, like Emily Nadowski, who is a sex educator who's wrote like Come As You Are and Burnout and her new book, which I just forgot because
It's all
I
right.
can't remember things anymore. I haven't
That
over
doesn't get
there.
better, by the way. So
I
I'm
know.
sorry for you.
I'm just like, I can no longer form sentences, but that's okay. Anyway, she's like one of my faves. And she talks about, like pleasure is the measure, right? So the other thing we have to do is reframe what it means to experience sex and how is that supposed to look? Because, most of the sex education people receive in the United States is from porn, which makes our understanding of sex to be performative, right? Instead of maybe connection, instead of intimacy and integrating different like ways of connecting. And so we can still start to learn, like as we are like recognizing our grief and anger, then we can be like, okay, well, so what does this look like for me now? And how can I move forward to offer myself and whomever I'm intimate with a sense of pleasure? And then how do I talk about that? And first, do I get to explore that on myself first? And what does that mean? Right? And giving ourselves permission to do that and to learn. And then learning how to have these conversations with partners, which can be extremely vulnerable if we haven't really been doing that. And it just, one of the things that we've taken away from sexual intimacy is a sense of play. And we can explore, like as kids, like we like poked, we like prodded, explored, and like we can do that same thing. And it doesn't have to be prescribed, like as we have been taught. Like it doesn't have to look like you have to do it like this, and then you have to go like this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different areas in which we can figure stuff out more. But I think for many of us, it's giving ourselves permission to do that, and taking off the armor that we have decided to wear to protect ourselves in different ways, and learning how to do that the best way we can, and knowing we're going to mess up and flub around and things like that. But there's, because even so, like as we age, we have to do that anyway, because what we experienced in our 20s and 30s will no longer be what we're going to be able to do in our 60s and 70s and things like this, right? So we're already going to have to adjust and change. And so it's okay to learn how to do that and to then offer ourselves ways to experience pleasure in whatever way that looks. And I think, like for me, when I talk to parents too, I ask them to define sex. And people roll their eyes, like, you want me to define sex, right? But then like you start to realize, oh, actually that's pretty complicated. Like, what does sex really mean? And what is that definition for? And so I try to tell people, like, we actually all have a different definition of what sex means to us. What we need to start doing then is we have to start learning how to communicate that to other people. And then ask them what sex means to other people. And then this is what we have to help our children with. And what does that mean to you? Right? And then how are you going to talk to other people? But those are the things where we really struggle, right? Because we're now just sending emojis back and forth.
I was going to say, that feels like you're saying, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to flip Mount Everest and we're going to put the point on the ground. So everybody just steer, get your shovel, and we're just going to start. I mean, you just said, I am so rarely speechless. I am kind of speechless at what you just said, because the enormity of it in the face of the simplicity of it is shocking. And I think maybe what's affecting me so strongly, or the most strongly, is sadness that we've taken this actually, on one hand, sort of simple, basic thing. I mean, every species does it.
Right.
So it's not like we're unique.
Right.
We've taken this thing, which is a biological need or desire or function, or however you want to think about it, and we've made it virtually impossible to be successful.
Yes. I mean, that's what it feels like, right? And then, however, and that's why I try to work with families, especially like from the very beginning. This is why when people are like, well, you can't, teach sexual health of sexual health from, and like until they're at this age. And I'm like, no, like actually, and I think we have to change. It's almost like we need to change the terminology because sex education is such a trigger for people. But like really what that means is we're teaching people about what their body parts are, what they do. We're teaching about emotions. Like, I see you're angry. Like, how do we work with the anger? Where do you want to express it? Where do we put it? How do we work it through our bodies? Like, these are the things that sex education actually is. And that people are afraid of it because we grew up from the very beginning, like just doing that simple activity of like, okay, write out all the names that you've heard for vagina. Write out all the names you've heard for penis or for scrotum, or for vulva, like that. And now write all the names you've heard for eyes. Write all the names you've heard for hand. When you think about it, the fact that I've done this exercise before, right? Obviously. And the fact that you can have over 50 names for one body part, the body parts in between our legs, we decide at that point that they are weird because we're not calling any other body part by really, like noggin, we have a head, maybe that's a noggin, but like to have over 50 compared to maybe 2 or 3. So like we're already placing an element of shame onto that body part from the very beginning. If in the very beginning we say, this is your penis, I'm wiping your penis as I'm changing your diaper, because also while we're parents talking to our kids while we're changing their diaper and smiling at them as we're changing their diaper and having eye contact is creating a loving attachment experience and also a positive experience, in that area and things like that. And being able to talk about that moving forward helps change the narrative from that point. And I always say to people too, I want parents to teach kids like their anatomical names for their body parts to talk to with adults. Also, I understand that people may feel different, like in terms of their gender identity and things like that. And if that, for their mental health, they need to call the body part by a different name, that's fine and okay, as long as they know the term that can be then told to adults for safety reasons. Right? But that to me, like, is just telling that it's just so strange to me that, again, from what I said earlier, that we have decided that a body part determines so much of our lives, of how to act and be and live in a world. Like, it's real weird.
Yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up. The Instagram snippet it's real weird.
It's real weird.
What's the good news to wrap this up?
The good news. I think the good news for me, again, is that it's possible to change. I see parents who are really trying hard I see a lot of parents who are like, this makes me really uncomfortable, but I want better for my kids. And I don't know enough about this, so I'm going to invite people who I trust to come and share in this education with me, right? And one of the things, how I start some of my workshops, is I have parents and stuff close their eyes and things, and I say, I want you to think about a caregiver who you felt safe with in your life. And then I want you to hear these words. And I say something along the lines of, Dear child, I want you to have the best relationships that you can. And I want you to feel connected and a sense of pleasure. And I want you to feel joy. And so for you to experience those things, we're going to have conversations. And those conversations are going to involve talking about your body, talking about how it functions, talking about having hard conversations. And some of these conversations may feel awkward, but you are worth the awkward. And those are some of the things that I say. And then I ask the adults to open their eyes. And I said, how did that feel? And they said, it would have been nice to have been told those things, right? And then their shoulders kind of go down, and then they're just like, all right. It is like that moment just makes people go, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to try this. And I think once we get to that heart of it, of knowing that every person in this world deserves and has a right to having relationships where they feel cared for and loved. And part of that is talking about sexual health education. That's like, to me, that's why I'm doing this. Even though people think it's crazy and weird, and I'm not making a lot of money doing this right now, but I can't help it. It's just, to me, it feels like the biggest need. And I just want people to not hurt anymore. Again, that's what I want to do. And that's why I try to do this.
Wow. Gosh, thank you for spending this time with me and with my audience.
Thank you for having me.
Some conversations all my conversations are great. I get off these calls and lots of things linger and lots of ideas continue to pop up months later. But this one feels a little like a game changer because I think like all stages of grief, if you can get to that place of acceptance, then maybe you can get to the place of, okay, well, a new normal might look different, and that doesn't have to be bad. Maybe it's good, or it's just different. Maybe it's less about judgment or value and just more about saying, okay, I could have a new normal now. It's not too late. I could put the old stories down and see what the new story could be.
Yeah, totally.
Wow. Thank you, Kara.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Everyone else, we will talk soon. Thanks for joining me on Brave Middle Ground. I hope today's conversation inspired you to embrace the power of the in-between and take steps toward deeper connection and understanding. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support grows our community and keeps these meaningful conversations going. For more information on Brave Middle Ground and everything else I'm working on, go to daynadelval.com. Brave Middle Ground is mixed by Matthew O'Mara, and our music is by Quinn Del Val. Until next time, I'm Dayna Del Val. Stay curious, stay courageous, and stay connected.